Sorry about that, guys. If you are here, we are having some technical difficulties this evening. Try this one more time. I'm so sorry, guys. All right, guys, we are having some technical difficulties. Let me see if I can. For some reason, I am not able to add anybody here on the live. Looks like Instagram is having some problems. I'm going to restart one more time, guys. I apologize for this. Dominyka, I apologize to you. There she goes. We are.
Hey,
Ha ha ha! Technical difficulties, finally.
yeah, finally. So sorry. Not to,
No, it's totally fine. It's probably my end.
I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's all. Blame it on Instagram. Blame it on the
But
technology.
I will. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in tonight on the Half Guard Half Hour. My guest, the amazing, the one, the only, Dominyka Obelenyte. I hope I didn't butcher that too badly.
Not too
Uh,
bad.
not too badly at all. Thank you for joining me on the Half Guard Half Hour. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. This is such a pleasure. I love doing podcasts. I love talking about Jitsu and myself. Happy to be.
Amazing, amazing. Jumping right in, Dominyka. Um, you know, I've been a follower of yours for a long time. I've watched you roll at Show Your Rolls event a few years ago. They had the event in Manhattan. As a follower of yours, as a fan of your jujitsu, talk us through for our listeners, the people who are watching live right now who don't know anything about you. Talk us through your background, what got you started in jujitsu, and if you can, describe what style of jujitsu you're mostly in, what kind of guards you play, things of that nature.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot. So let me start with the easiest one, which is what have I done in jiu-jitsu? So I think everybody most likely knows me from being one of the youngest black belt world champions to ever be on the scene. I won the black belt division 4 times, twice in my weight class, which is heavyweight and super heavyweight, and then 2 times in absolute as well. That those were my like rookie years as a black belt, and then before then I actually won worlds 6 or 5 more times, so I am a 9-time overall world champion. Besides that, apart from the competitive accomplishments, when I was around 16 I got really into this activist idea of demanding equal pay from the IBJJF. That's when I started this movement called hashtag equal pay for BJJ. And I started campaigning on behalf of equality of pay from the IBJJF towards female athletes in their IBJJF pro competitions, which didn't get us that, but it did earn us the equivalent black belt top earners prize, where both the female and male black belts get $10,000 at the end of the year. So that is pretty fucking cool. Those are some small scale jiu-jitsu accomplishments. Right now, small scale, I'm working as the head of an academy in Long Island City in Queens called Heinz Combat Sports, making the pandemic jiu-jitsu scene work for me in New York at the moment. And otherwise, I'm always thinking about expanding. So I'm playing around with the idea of opening up my own school and kind of revamping my competitive career. We'll see where that goes in the next year, but I'm really excited for the changes to come.
So you talked to you talked about competing and your drive to get equal pay for women in the jiu-jitsu scene, especially from the IBJJF, because I think I have nothing but respect for the women out there, and I think sometimes the women put on more competitive and more interesting matches than the men in most cases. So I agree with you, 100% pay, equal pay at least across the board for men and women should be, and in some cases maybe the women should make a little bit extra. Um, so,
I don't know about that, but I would.
so with that being said, what do you feel has been the biggest roadblock to getting across to the IBJJF equal pay?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with self-interest. So I look at the IBJJF as a corporation and not an organization, and they're interested in their profit margins, right? So if they don't really need to offer that extra money, if they don't really feel like it's going to affect their turnouts and their numbers, if they don't feel like this is an ethical kind of issue, it's a social issue. It's not. It has nothing really to do with what the IBJJF is doing or whether competitors will show up. If a whole slew of 1,000 people decide to boycott the IBJJF and just not give them their money, then you might see some kind of changes. But right now, or back in the day, this was like maybe 9 years ago, it wasn't really necessary or even integral or of interest to them to pay attention to things like this because they knew that they would still have people showing up. I think nowadays, I know Ana Vieira kind of restarted this movement with Luana Alzaguir and got a lot of women on board. We're seeing changes. Definitely, we saw the all-female card at Fight to Win. We're seeing a lot of all-female cards or female tournaments or female heavy super fight organizations start to crop up, which is amazing. But when it comes to the IBJJF, maybe nowadays it would be different if the same kind of pressure were applied because we're noticing a lot of companies and corporations, maybe not because they actually care, but because they want to have like a better kind of relationship with their customer base, start to listen to people demanding for kind of activist policies to be listened to. And so it might be different, but nowadays I think the goal really is beyond the IBJJF. It's beyond somebody offering you money. It's about setting a standard for kind of including women in most major sporting events, most major organizations, and most major kind of jiu-jitsu sanctioned events. It's more about kind of operating with that inclusivity already in mind.
100%. So you talked about being one of the youngest black belts. What got you started in jiu-jitsu? When, I know you started at a very young age. You've trained under JT, with JT. So what got you started in jiu-jitsu and what's kept you in jiu-jitsu this long?
Yeah, great question. This is one of my favorite questions to answer, and I'm going to probably give you a much more long-winded answer than I usually do. So basically, I started jiu-jitsu because when I was around 7 years old, I was an immigrant kid in Queens, New York, not really understanding English so well. And I was being bullied in school, and it wasn't like my school experience wasn't dominated by the bullying, but it was bad enough where my parents kind of took notice and decided to enroll me in self-defense classes. So I started training Japanese jiu-jitsu at a really small dojo in Queens. And then when we moved to New Jersey, my dad didn't really know the difference between Japanese and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and kind of was all the same ballpark. So he enrolled me in Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes and noticed that it was very similar to wrestling and had a lot of grappling elements that seemed more realistic maybe to him. So he decided that that's like what I would do. And I hated it, dude. I fucking hated jiu-jitsu, like with all my soul. Like I would every day I'd get back from school, I would just like be hoping and praying and wishing that I would get hurt or there'd be so much traffic we wouldn't be able to make it to practice, or it'd be like crazy snow or something like that. I would always be hoping for some crazy world event to happen that would keep me from going to training. And it was because there was so much pressure put on me. My father was my coach, so you don't escape your coach when you live with them. And everything was like, it started off being very, like, not super involved. Like, my dad was involved in, like, my schooling, my kind of health, like, if I was eating good, whether I was working out, whether I was, like, tough or not. But when I started to be more competitive, then it became, like, very rigorous. And he was in charge of my schedule. I was very, like, he was a very strong-willed, strong-minded person, and sometimes would like border on abusive. So it was difficult to be in that. It was like a suffocating environment. A lot of times I felt like I didn't really have anywhere to go in my own brain or in my own like mental space to kind of rest and decompress. So that's why I hated it, because I felt like I was always being judged. Like whenever I'd go to train, I had to be on my best performance. Doesn't matter if I was having a bad day or I was tired, I had to do my best, put my best foot forward, tap everybody. If not tap them, at least rack up like 20 points in the match. Otherwise, I'd get like a really swift scolding when I got home. So I had a lot of pressure on me from a very young age. And I started to associate the pressure I was getting from my dad with jujitsu as a whole. So I was like, if you take jujitsu away and out of the equation, that pressure doesn't exist. Therefore, I hate jujitsu. And then a really cool thing started happening when I was about, I think, 14 or 15. I don't know what happened, but I think for one summer break, I started being allowed to kind of venture off into the city and train at Marcelo Garcia's. This is the gym that I was training in at the time, by myself, and just train in the morning and then train in the afternoon and then train in the evening, and then spend the rest of the time going to the library and reading or just hanging out at the park, just doing whatever. And I started to notice that when I didn't have watchful eyes on me, I was really enjoying the sport. Like if I could train with a friend of mine and not want to kill her, it actually felt kind of cool. It felt like a nice exchange, an intimate, vulnerable exchange of energy that felt really good. It felt like we were kind of dancing together, but the dance was resisted. I always like to liken jujitsu to a ballroom dance where the partners don't know each other's moves. So one is trying to force the other one to dance their dance, and the other one is doing the same to them. So I really started to reframe and reshape how I saw jujitsu, and that really helped me in terms of starting to grow a fondness for it. And then the more time I spent with it, and the less involved my family was in my competitions and everything like that, the more I started to enjoy it. And then obviously giving credit to everybody that helped me in my jiu-jitsu journey. I started off at a small school in Jersey called Performance BJJ, and that's where I first met JT Torres. He was a blue belt at the time, and my good friend Jay Hayes. When they left to transfer to Team Lloyd Irvin, I left with them because I was doing most of my training with them and doing privates with them all the time. And then I couldn't really commit to Team Lloyd Irvin. They were in Maryland, and I wasn't really training with them that much. So my dad decided to try and find other people for me to train with in Jersey because Maryland was not really an attainable goal. And then we ended up finding my good friend and mentor, Emily Kwok, who was teaching at a Gold's Gym. And then I started doing privates with her because my dad thought I really needed a feminine influence in me who I could listen to because he knew that I was starting to listen to him less and less. So Emily was the person that encouraged me to join Marcelo's because that's where she trained, and she thought I needed exposure to more high-level training. And that's where I was for 6 years until I left, I think, in 2015 or 2016. I joined Team Fabio Clemente for a little while, and then I left again to pursue teaching more for myself. And now I'm kind of teamless, but I run my own team. So basically living the dream at the moment.
Living the dream, of course. You know, you were at Marcelo's for a while. Um, what did it mean to you receiving your black belt from Marcelo? What, you know, a lot of the jiu-jitsu community considers him the greatest, right? So, or at least one of the greatest out there. What did it mean to you to receive your black belt from Marcelo? And how old were you when you got your black belt?
I was 18.
Okay. 18 years old, a black belt under Marcelo Garcia. So what was that like for you? What did that mean to you to receive a black belt from Marcelo?
Um, it was it's a complicated thing, I think. Because I really appreciated Marcelo as a practitioner and as a human. I really respected his game. I respected the quality of training that he had. I respected how intensely he cared about his competitors and how involved he was in their process. But I didn't necessarily always see eye to eye in him in terms of technique. So sometimes something he would say wouldn't resonate with me because I'm like, Marcelo, I'm not a koala bear. Like, I'm not shaped like a koala bear. I'm a giant giraffe. Like, I'm awkward and gangly, and everything I do needs to be slow and precise because if I'm not, somebody that's small and sharp is just going to whiz right past me. So it became difficult for him to kind of transfer most of the stuff that was integral in his game into me, which is fine. I always advocate for instructors throwing a whole bunch of things at the wall of their students and seeing what sticks. I don't think there's a one way to do jiu-jitsu well. but that was a point of contention between us, and it wasn't like it wasn't something that made a relationship bad. It was just something that I always took notice of. And when I received my black belt for him, it was almost like I was being seen by him, like for the first time. And I know it wasn't the first time, but for me as an impressionable adolescent, like working into adulthood, it was like Marcelo was like, hey, like I see the effort that you've put in, and I understand what you've been through, and here is this gift that I'm giving to you because I think you're ready to start your career as a black belt. And I remember him saying that he got his black belt at 18, so why wouldn't he give me my black belt at 18? And we didn't really have a super tight knit relationship as compared to some of the other competitors that were kind of my age and part of that whole like little dream team clubhouse that was at Marcel's at the time. We didn't really have that closeness. So I was really excited by the prospect of him approving of me in that way, and I carried that with me. That's why it made leaving so difficult, because I totally saw the space as my family, and I saw a lot of the people there as people that were going to stay with me in my jiu-jitsu career forever. And I really appreciated Marcelo's impact on me as well. I just knew that I needed something different. There were a couple of key people in the space that were making it difficult for me to flourish to the best of my abilities and focus on training and learning and being better. So I knew I had to make that decision, but I will always respect everything that Marcelo has kind of done for my game, and his influence in my jiu-jitsu. Like, my X guard is still fully like his doing, you know, his hand is in my jiu-jitsu for sure. Yeah, so that's just the story of it.
So you know, you talked about running the program now at Hines. I know it. I know of the gym. I used to co-teach at a space with somebody who taught Muay Thai there. So as a teacher now, as you're running the jiu-jitsu program now, what do you try to instill in your students on a day-to-day basis who are either struggling, plateauing? You know, I think one of the things that happens a lot for us, especially as we start, you know, ranking up, we sometimes hit that wall, or we hit those plateaus. As an instructor and head instructor of the program, what do you tell your students when they come to you to, like, motivate them or get them over that plateau, or when they feel like they're hitting that plateau and they're not progressing? What's advice that you give them, or what are some words that you tell them to make them feel better?
Yeah, so I want to first start off with like general advice for anybody that has any kind of issues within their own jiu-jitsu, and this can be self-esteem related. I think progress, I think thinking that you're not progressing is a self-esteem issue for sure. You can be progressing and not realize it. You can be like, I feel like we're always growing, and I think it's very difficult to see that happening because we are with ourselves all the time. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago, but we think that we are because we've been ourselves that whole time, those whole 5 years. So I'd like to start off by saying that the first thing we need to do is to find measurements that help us understand that we are moving forward. And that can be anything from like thinking about a movement that maybe you haven't practiced to perfection yet, coming up with like drilling situations where you are practicing it in full and then are able to replicate it in training. Maybe not seamlessly, but at least better than you were able to a week ago. Or finding training partners that you can like measure yourself against. So not just finding one training partner that you're always training with because they might be progressing at the same time, but maybe finding somebody from a different school, or maybe making sure that you train with a certain beginner or a certain really high level person to understand how your game is being framed against theirs as they progress. And that's something that I always communicate to my students, because one of the most common things that they talk about when they're talking about not progressing is, what do I need to change? And I always have to ask them, well, what are you doing? Like, do you know what you're doing? Do you have a plan? Do you understand where you succeed and where you fail? Because if you don't, then you won't ever really know if you're progressing. And I think the most important part about jiu-jitsu, whether you're a hobbyist or a competitor or whatever, you want to be able to execute, right? Maybe you don't want to win. Maybe you're not so competitively inclined that you have to submit everyone you face, but you want to execute, and you want to execute efficiently and technically well. So if you want to do that, you have to have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, everything fails. So I like to take the emotional side out of it for my students and tell them this is a problem that you can solve if you just take the time and effort to do it. And a lot of jiu-jitsu success happens outside of the mats, honestly. A lot of it, I know some of the most successful people I know in jiu-jitsu drill a lot. They watch tape, they study, they write down movements, they try to compartmentalize how things work. When I was in my prime of competition around like 17, 18, I was doing tree maps all the time. I do, okay, spider guard. This is a position where I'm safe in. If I really want to go into a submission right off of there, omoplata is a really high percentage thing for me. So I'll go omoplata. If that doesn't work, I'll go to de la Hiva, and then I'll just keep building off of that to make sure that I'll always have an answer no matter what position I'm put in. And then also in terms of being a good instructor, I think it all comes down to communication and having like emotional availability for your students. Just because I try to take out the emotions out of the actual coaching portion doesn't mean I can't be present for them being frustrated. And I think the important thing about being a coach is you don't have to tell people how to live their lives. You can just tell them that what they're doing is enough and that you're noticing them and that you do have some advice on what to do if things aren't going right. And equally as important is don't think that your students are people that like you have any control over. They are paying members. They're paying you for a service. And I know that's like, we like to think that that's not what jiu-jitsu is. We like to think that it's almost like church. Like we go there, we do our thing, and it's all very spiritual and beautiful. And it is. It is like a spiritual, vulnerable, intimate thing, whatever. But it is a service at the end of the day. So you can't expect your students to be like your children. You can't expect them to be your best friends. You have to have some sort of boundaries in place that protect you and them from any kind of accidents or bad decisions that are made. If they want to train at other gyms, it is their right to do so. If they want to question a decision that you made, you will have to take that criticism and take a look at yourself and see if there's anything that you can do as an instructor to change to make the environment a little bit better. So yeah, I told you I will probably drag this out to be like an hour and a half long because my answers are so long.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Obviously, the people that are watching are going to love it. The people that will listen to this later on Spotify and audio will love it. Thank you. Real talk, like somebody just said in the chat. So, kind of leading off the question that I just asked, in your jiu-jitsu journey, what do you feel has been the biggest challenge for you coming through the ranks, or in general, what do you feel has been your biggest challenge to overcome in the jiu-jitsu space?
Wow, there are definitely a few. The first largest challenge was definitely leaving Marcelo's, definitely leading a big name gym where the head instructor is somebody that is beloved by all, and having your integrity kind of questioned by people who don't really understand the situation. And that's all well and good. Like, people are totally free to have their own opinions, but it was kind of difficult to understand how it was being perceived. And I think I definitely put in too much weight into what other people thought of me at the time. Again, I was like 18, 19, so I was really not like, I wasn't not smart, but I was 19, and I think we all know what we were like at 19.
Yeah.
And prone to like working off of emotions and not being like the most rational human beings. So I was really like in the zone, fired up, like ready to kind of venture out and do my own thing. And I think I just made a lot of like really hot-headed decisions at that time. And I don't regret making any of them, but I do know that there were a lot of growing pains associated with leaving a big gym like that. But I don't think that wasn't the biggest kind of hurdle or biggest obstacle. I'm pretty sure the biggest obstacle for me was having to completely put jiu-jitsu on pause for myself for about 7 or 8 months after I had shoulder surgery. So my labrum tore off the bone because of a series of like small complex movements that were jiu-jitsu based. and I had to get surgery to have it reattached, which meant I wouldn't be able to train or even move my arm at all for 7 months. And that was really difficult. When you hear the news, you're like, yeah, 7 months is going to breeze by, but then you have to think about it in the context of it's over half a year, and then the reality of it kind of sinks in more. So after I had gotten surgery, the first like month or so went by fine, but the PT was so minimal and so small scale that it didn't really seem like I was gaining mobility back or going anywhere. And I wasn't really able to drill or do even basic movements like running and jumping weren't allowed. So being deprived of that physicality was really hard. I fell into a crazy deep depression. I started questioning whether or not jujitsu was important enough to keep in my life if it caused injuries of this scale. And I really started to doubt my interest in competition because I associated hard training with injury, and I associated competition with hard training. Like all three were in the same bubble, and I couldn't separate them. They were all intertwined. So I was like, if I don't want to train hard, if I don't want to get injured, I don't want to train hard, which means I don't want to compete. And I started talking very seriously about retiring. And then coming back from that, going back into routine jujitsu was very difficult. It was, there's a lot of, we like to think about how we're not like these egotistical creatures in jujitsu that we're so cool, bro. I don't care. Like gold medal, no gold medal, whatever. I'm just a spiritualized being. At all, we have egos, and that's fine. That's what makes us human. And going back into training, after like so you win all these things and then you get really hurt and then you don't train and then you go back into training and people still have Dominyka, the world champion, rattling around in their brains. And then you train with them after not having trained in a while and you're rusty as hell and you don't know what the newest fucking Berimbolo shit is. You feel stupid and small, and it's crazy. The ego,
Agreed.
the ego just like latches onto you and is like, hey, my pride is really hurting right now because I'm not like this incredible beast of a competitor or even training partner as I was before. It's going to take time to work back into it. And you're like, damn, I put in all that work and now it seems like I have to work just as hard to get back to the place where I was at baseline. So that was a really difficult but super necessary journey for me because I think it like checked me. It checked me where I realized that I wasn't invincible, which a lot of kids think they are. I wasn't infallible. I had things to work on all the time, and I could always be improving no matter what. So I think it was one of the biggest obstacles I've ever had to face, but also definitely one of the most necessary.
For sure. I felt, I mean, I've separated shoulders, torn knees. So I definitely understand where you're coming from on that. And especially with COVID, when everything hit in March and then all gyms shut down and it was like 4, 5, 6 months between, even being able to even train, it made me depressed.
Yeah.
It made me upset. Like I sitting around just not having that outlet in the physicality and the mental part of it. And I think that's part of um, jujitsu that people who don't train kind of don't understand is the mental aspect and the mental freedom that it gives you when you've had a rough day at work or you're having your kids are annoying you or things of that nature. So that restart and that reset when you first walk back into the gym is kind of uplifting, but you're winded, your cardio sucks, things of that nature. So I know that can be super, super difficult. So talking about competition, you brought up earlier that once we get a little bit further into this year, maybe next year, you're looking to start getting back into that competition mode as a 9-time world champion. Talk to me about what your training looks like when you're in that mode, or how do you prep yourself in order to get ready for these bigger competitions like Worlds or whatever is going on at the moment, Abu Dhabi. How do you prep for competition, and what is your mindset like in that period?
So, right now, like my thoughts around competition are very the goalpost is always moving. I haven't committed to any one train of thought. But what competitive training always has looked like for me is pushing boundaries and pushing limitations. And I know a lot of people reference like other athletes when it comes to training for jiu-jitsu, like people reference Kobe Bryant and Muhammad Ali about like putting in extra hours, like or that like famous quote. I don't know if it's like Muhammad Ali or Alexander Carolyn even that his your warm up is or his his warm up is your like full workout. Um, that stuff is very iconic behavior, but honestly has never really been me. I've always been more of a strategist, and I've always been like very fond of my own handmade moniker of being a very lazy jiu-jitsu practitioner. I don't want to move if I don't have to. I don't want to exert energy if I don't need to, so I'm not going to. So when I talk about competitive training, I was still training every day. I was still showing up at the gym every day. I would train probably 6 times a week, sometimes five. I'd usually drill 2 to 3 times a week, and then I'd do cardio, which was either elliptical, biking, running once a week, and then lift weights 2 to 3 times a week. So it's kind of a packed schedule, but I was never a fan of doing multiple training sessions a day. I actually thought it was really exhausting. I did that for about a summer. I was doing noon. I think I was doing an 11 a.m. class, a noon class, and then sometimes 2 evening classes, usually one. And I felt myself growing so tired, and my body was feeling so overworked. I was heading straight for burnout. So I became more of a fan of localizing what I needed to improve upon and what I needed to give weight to. So even my competitive training sessions turned into strategy sessions. I would think about, I would ask like my training partners to only play open guard with me, and my whole goal for like the entire 5 minute round would be to build up advantages and then sweep towards the end, which is like a very common competitive strategy. Or if I was playing top, I would do my best to not get swept and not let them rack up any advantages, and then look for a pass at the end of time. And these kinds of strategies are not just useful for practicing in the moment sensations. They're also useful in building up this idea that you are going to surpass your opponent no matter who they are. You're going to let them break before you break. So you're kind of pushing the pace, and you're always getting them to be on their toes and not really letting them edge into their territory. You're always pulling them into your game. And towards the end, you've exhausted them so much that you're going to find points and you're going to end up winning the match. And I think when it comes down to competition, that's really what it's about. Who has more confidence, who has more belief in their movements, obviously who's more technical, obviously who's stronger when technique is probably even. But it really comes down to your belief system. And if you think you're going to succeed, you will. If you are going to work hard enough to break your opponent, you will win. So that's kind of where most of my competitive training was concentrated around.
So, what are your thoughts? The sub only genre of jujitsu over the last 5 years, and I think a big part of it is thanks to Eddie Bravo and EBI, and that whole scene. What are your thoughts on sub only and the sub only genre that's been really popular over the last 5 years?
I really like the idea of sub only. I don't like long time limits. I like EBI rules are really interesting. I'm gonna keep it at interesting. I'm not a huge fan of starting in those kind of ready-made positions after time is up, because I feel like it kind of discounts what was done in the round before. And then I've also heard a lot of people say, "Oh, well, it works if you win, and it doesn't work if you lose. Like you don't like the rule set if you end up losing, and you think it's the greatest thing in the world if you win." So I think it really depends on who is benefiting off of those positions. As for submission only, I honestly think that's probably the best way to encourage a more open fight, or a more open match, excuse me, where you're getting both athletes to open up and really show what their game is like made of, instead of just kind of relying on steady stalemate positions like 50-50 or even closed guard. I do think, however, that time is a huge limiter in jiu-jitsu. We need to take out these long ass rounds. We don't need to have 10-minute rounds.
Agreed.
Most athletes will actually receive a benefit from only having to move for 6 minutes, and you're going to get to see matches that you haven't seen before. You'll get to see heavyweights moving like lightweights because they have nothing to lose. They have a much shorter term to be way more explosive, and you're going to get to see like some incredible energy. So I've always been a fan of taking out these like long-winded rounds, and you're going to end up seeing, not that I think that IBJJF matches are less interesting, I don't by any means, but I know a common argument for the IBJJF being more boring is that the matches are really long, and if you have 5 or 6 in a day, you're not going to give it your all off bat. You're going to have to conserve energy and play to your strengths and play in positions that will slow down the match. And when, as a black belt, I'm speaking to this because I've had this experience, when you meet up with your opponent in your first, second, third match, you're both signing a contract right then and there that you're going to take it easy for like 4 to 5 minutes and then slowly wind the pace up. And we both play into it. It's a contract that mutually benefits us both because we know we need to conserve energy because we are trying to make it to the finals.
For sure. So I can't agree with you more. You know, some of the things, and to your point, the EBI rules are interesting, but I do think watching an EBI event that's 4 hours long because every match is 10 minutes plus potential 30-minute overtime is really hard. As somebody who enjoys watching it, I enjoy the sub only genre when they are 5 or 6 minute matches, when somebody catches that sub early on, but you don't really see that in some of these longer events. So in your jiu-jitsu competitive career, who do you feel has been your toughest match so far in your career, and why?
Man. Oh, toughest match. Ooh, okay. I'm going to give you a whole bunch.
I will take all of them.
The toughest match. The toughest match, I will say, mentally, the toughest match I've ever had was against Tammy Musametsi in, I think, 2015. I believe it was the Absolute at Worlds. We were both fresh black belts, and this girl had her berimbolo entries refined to a T. She just kept attacking them and attacking them and attacking them, and I just kept getting off balance. And I started off standing. I managed to earn my advantage for coming up off of the double guard pull. I could not for the life of me get her into any kind of serious passing position because she's so small. She's the length of my leg. She kept into like a tiny little ball, and I had a really hard time opening her up. So all she was doing was feeding into these berimbolos, which were really difficult for me to defend. If you're defending 10 in a row, it becomes really exhausting to try and keep up. So what I started to do was I started to try and sweep myself. I was like, okay, you're going for a berimbolo and I'm falling back. You have to come on top. She realized this and did not play into it. She started to not come on top. She started to try and wiggle around my legs and try to take my back from there. So that didn't work as a strategy. And towards the end of the match, I felt myself mentally breaking. I felt myself getting so frustrated and so exhausted. My muscles were screaming. They were so tired from constantly being standing and trying to move around somebody who was much faster than me. And I was like ready to burst out crying because I was so fatigued. And by the skin of my teeth, I won that match. But that has to be one of the hardest matches of my life. And then one of the harder matches that is not the hardest but was really, really fun was my last match against Mackenzie Dern, or my second to last match against Mackenzie Dern, which I won. But the reason I loved it so much is because I was fully playing into my lazy guard player mode, and I didn't care if I was swept by her. My whole entire strategy was actually, I know I'm going to get swept at some point. I'm going to let it be earlier in the round so I can look for sweeping opportunities back and potentially land myself in a better position, like sweep to mount, sweep to side control, something like that. And she's really small too, so I did not want to spend any time trying to pass her guard because she's so difficult to pin down and she's so squirmy. Um, and I really love this match, not solely because I won it, not solely because there were like 10 sweep exchanges back and forth between us, but because my coach at the time was Gianni Griffo, and he was panicking. Every time I would get this man would like grab his hair and scream and he'd be like, "No, Dom, don't fall. Come back up, Dom. Don't do it." And I felt so bad because I hadn't told him my strategy, and I was like, I would try to like give him a look like it's okay, like I know what I'm doing. But he would just kind of lose his mind every time I would get points scored on me, and then he'd be like, "Okay, okay, cool, you're back on top." So I thought that was so funny because I saw how much he cared about me at that moment and how I just totally blindsided him as my coach. And then afterwards, when I came to talk to him, he was like, "Yeah, don't ever do that to me again," because like that was the matches I've ever watched.
Actually, Gianni's going to be on here in a couple weeks, so like I can't wait. I'll have to ask him about that story.
Yeah,
So
I've paid money a bit during the pandemic times. I've gone down to Hoboken to visit him. He's a good dude.
yeah, he trains down there at the UFC gym in Hoboken. I can't wait to get to talk to him. So amazing dancer. For those of you guys out there that don't follow Dom, if you haven't seen her Instagram, she's got some amazing dance skills. You recently also sold some art because I know you're an amazing and talented artist. In the art world, what did it mean to you to sell your first painting? Because I know you recently did that, or I could be wrong. I apologize if I am. But as an artist, what does it mean to you to be a sold artist now?
So, I've actually sold work before, but I've never sold to a stranger. I've sold to like friends, family, even like acquaintances. And I'm making it sound like this is happening all the time. It's not. It's a once in a like while opportunity because I don't really sell inexpensive work. Like I don't sell small drawings. I sell like paint that I've put my heart and soul into, and other works that are just like very meticulous, and so they're at a higher price range. But I did a show recently in Brooklyn at the Williamsburg Art Historical Center, and the curator of the show decided to buy both pieces that I exhibited, and it was an incredibly good feeling, especially because the works are going to be part of a public foundation, so they're going to be exhibited in her own kind of space that other people can take a look at. So it's kind of like a gallery setting. As an artist, I feel like, I mean, I think actors can probably speak to this. You're always looking for opportunities, but you're kind of not quite sure if anything you're doing is actually working. Like you're auditioning, and if you get roles, you get them, but you think that something happens after you get something, right? Like after you win a medal, you think that something's supposed to happen, and then it doesn't really happen. Or you think if you graduate college, you're gonna get something, right? You're gonna get a job, or like something's gonna fall into your lap, and that's not how the world works. So I think when you're a creative type, and you're throwing out feelers, you're like trying to do all these things, like as an artist, submitting to shows, submitting for residencies, trying to advertise work, trying to advertise yourself as a selling artist. You're throwing all this out into the world and you're seeing what sticks, and very little of it sticks. So when you have an opportunity where something like this happens, where you have this goal of having somebody you don't really know who just appreciates you because they appreciate your art, buy your work, then it's a phenomenal feeling, because then you know that that person just genuinely likes what you made. They're not trying to support you. They're not your mom saying, "Oh man, I don't know how she's gonna make rent this month. I better buy something from her." It's somebody seeing the work and having an emotional relationship with it and liking it enough to buy it. So it is a wonderful feeling, and it's actually, I've been getting into the habit of writing down goals for myself in every respect of my life, whether that's my professional career, my jiu-jitsu career, my art career, any of that. What I would like to achieve in like the next 6 months, the next year, and unwarranted advice for anyone listening: that shit works. Manifesting shit totally works. wrote down that I wanted to sell a big piece of work to a serious buyer about a month ago, and it happened. So I definitely think that, again, planning and having concrete goals in mind, and then putting a lot of positive energy towards making those goals a reality will help bring about some big changes to your life.
So in the art world, who's been your biggest influence? Either somebody that like who's been your biggest influence in the art world when it comes to your own personal art, and or who's an artist that you really admire out there, and really kind of look at that work and it just wows you?
Yeah, wow, this is a great question. There's one artist that I really want to mention that I believe his name is James John. I know it's a JJ. I'm also thinking of another John. I think his name is James John. Um, he's an artist that works with huge scale acrylic paintings that show like fantastical lands. He's the same artist who created, if for those of you that know the movie Mother with Jennifer Lawrence, he created the movie poster for Mother, where it's Jennifer Lawrence kind of holding her bare heart out in her hands. I The way he uses color is absolutely phenomenal, and he's more of a contemporary artist. Somebody who inspired him is also somebody who I really like, which is Takashi Murakami, who plays around with color and plays around with these like animated cartoon-like characters, but has these like serious but also like very funny, very inappropriate tropes around his paintings. Salvador Dali was always a huge influence for me because of his crazy surrealism and because of the fact that he staunchly was against. I don't know how this is if this is true or not. He might have just been saying it, but he was staunchly against this. He preferred to like really test the boundaries of his imagination, just do whatever he could from his current real life experience. And then Louise Bourgeois, extremely amazing, talented female artist that worked a lot with emotions and trauma and kind of relaying these very big, heavy feelings through conceptualism and symbolism. And then finally, somebody that like I very recently stumbled upon, the artist, very contemporary, James Nagai, who creates these incredible landscapes that are purely color and texture. And it's just, the works are completely brilliant. They look like clouds layered upon clouds, layered upon clouds. They're very aesthetically pleasing. His color use is extraordinary. And it seems like it's work that is meditative, so it has a repetitive quality to it, but he's always changing the color of it, so that means that he's always also processing what's happening, which is very difficult to do. I'm an artist that likes to make meditative works where I like to zone out as I make art. I'll watch Family Guy or listen to podcasts or talk to people or sit in silence or listen to music and just let my kind of hand do the brushing or do the drawing or the coloring. But to be involved, to be meditating and still involved is very tricky, and it's almost like it just means that your brain is always active, that you're not really getting to access a lot of Zen. So I really admire kind of his method.
Are there any parallels for you between art and jujitsu?
1000%, man, for sure. A big parallel that I can think of is like art is very subjective, and so is jujitsu. There are artists that are clearly famous for their work that are ingenious and revolutionized the art field through like new conceptualizations of techniques or new kind of imagery. And the same is totally true for jiu-jitsu. Marcelo Garcia was a pioneer. Hajo Gracie was a pioneer. Hanette Stack, like Emily Kwok were both pioneers. They like kind of brought specific kinds of techniques or specific kinds of mindsets to the forefront. And so it's the same for art. Also, perception of art is very subjective. So something that I see that looks beautiful to me may not be beautiful to you. And the same can be said for instruction quality and even jiu-jitsu. Like somebody that is super involved and loving to see the different mechanics and the rotations behind getting to a heel hook may be really bored by somebody who only plays a crazy close guard game and vice versa. And I think that's just like, I don't know, I think that just shows how much the sport has grown and how much availability we have right now, how much content we have to work with, and that's kind of awesome.
So, sticking with the art thing for a minute, what are your thoughts on this new, well, I wouldn't even really call it new, but this genre of graffiti art and graffiti artists that are up and coming in the art world? Because more and more as I pass galleries down in Soho or I pass galleries on the Lower East Side, a lot of what's being displayed in these windows are graffiti artists, a lot of big murals. If you go down to the World Trade Center, all of that is graffiti art. What are your thoughts on the genre of graffiti art and how that influences or has been influencing the art world over the last several years?
So I think I'm gonna group graffiti and street art into the same category in a minute, but to really quickly just touch on graffiti art, I think I used to have like a negative perception of it because I always assumed that graffiti art was kind of about like crying out about the importance of you as the human being defacing something. And not that I really cared about the buildings that were being graffitied over, it was more about like somebody painted this or had the intent of it looking like that, and you came along and decided that it wasn't going to be that anymore. Like you said that you were important enough to transfer this message on somebody else's kind of building or work. It really, for whatever reason, graffiti on bridges has always annoyed me because I'm always, somebody has to lower themselves down and suspend themselves to paint that shit. And you are doing the same thing for like 5 minutes and ruining a whole day's work. So that was the mindset that I had. And recently it's actually changed a lot. I view graffiti artists with a lot more respect now. I view them as kind of like guerrilla artists that are trying to spread a certain message or spread a certain kind of intent through their neighborhoods, through like local action. And being a visible artist is so difficult. It's really easy to make art and then just have it sit in your room for the rest of your life and never see the light of day. So getting any kind of exposure is really difficult. And committing to doing street art is also difficult. You're only really going to get to do like licensed work if you're hired by a company. And most companies don't want to hire you for art. They want to hire you for commercial purposes. You might be a talented artist. You're going to be really talented at drawing our ad on the side of this building. So I'm starting to see a lot of like a really like lovely innocence around graffiti. A lovely like I know who I am. I know what I'm about. I'm trying to paint my neighborhood in the ideas of my person. Like I'm trying to communicate with the world around me, that how it is I'm feeling and what kind of my image of myself is. And I think street art and graffiti art are really accessible arts. Like you can step into a city and walk the blocks and see this and understand that the people who live here brought this into reality. You don't need to go to a gallery. You don't need to pay a fee to a museum. You don't need to interact with any kind of corporate structure to see that visual. You get to step outside and witness it and interact with it and have an opinion about it. And I think that's really beautiful. I think it's very like open-ended and very, it's inviting the audience and the community to gather around and have a discussion about it, which is really uniting, I think.
Amazing. So, transitioning back to jujitsu, as somebody who's been champion equal pay in the space for women, I think we're starting to see a lot more women get into the sport, get into gyms, get into this whole space where, for a long time up until the last several years has been mostly male dominated. What advice do you give to other women who are in gyms where they feel like they're outnumbered, or what advice do you give to other women who are discouraged by going to a gym where maybe they show up to class and they're the only girl, or there's only one other girl in the class with them? What advice do you give to other females like that?
Gosh, I've really changed in mindset a lot since I was a kid about this particular topic. I think I was always under the impression that the world would have to change to accommodate you, and that's absolutely not true. Usually, actually, we have to adapt to fit the world around us in order to survive, and survival right now means something way different than it did 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years ago. Right now, it might just mean being in a social circle, having the opportunity to work where you work. So I think for the women that are still struggling with not really having access to training partners that look like them, that shit weighs on you. Like, that shit is really hard, especially if you're part of a misogynistic environment. It's like so crazy. It's like waking up and like choosing to go to a place where you're not wanted every single day, and fighting through that is really difficult. But even if you have supportive training partners and people that make you feel included, it's still stressful, because if you're the only woman in a male-dominated space, you're probably not going to look like me. You're probably going to be smaller. You might be petite. You might be 120 pounds. You're definitely going to be on the smaller side of the number of people at that gym. You're always going to have to deal with people that are stronger than you and people that are refusing to use technique, solely focused on really powering through things. And my advice is, like, you have to want to be a little bit extraordinary. You have to be willing to take on the role of pioneer, and you have to be willing to like be the change that you want to see in the community. If you want more women to join, you have to be the first one to step into that space and say, this is my space now too. Now you have to accommodate me. You have to share it with me. You don't have to treat me any differently. You don't have to treat me better than you do your partner, but you have to include me. And when that happens, that automatically opens the social door, for more women to come in. All it takes is one person making that decision and kind of deciding to be brave, because it's a brave choice. Like, it's hard. When I see people at the skate park, it looks like it's really hard to be the only girl at a skate park. It looks like a really difficult thing. Same on the soccer field. If there's a whole group of guys playing soccer, it seems like it'd be really hard to be the only girl venturing onto the field and saying they wanted to play too. But if you want women to be a part of the sport, you have to be that change. You have to take it upon yourself to enter these uncomfortable spaces and be okay with the discomfort and learn to work with it and then work around it for long enough to see that change is actually happening. And that's what I did. That's what every single woman that came before me had to do. A lot of women right now are extremely lucky to be in environments where they have female coaches, or the wives of their instructors are involved and want to help with the programming, where they have access to so many training partners. I'm thinking specifically now of Angelica Galvao's women's program at Atos, Leticia Ribeiro's program with Gracie Humayata. I'm just thinking about like these situations where women have cultivated not just extraordinary women's teams, but extraordinary teams, period. And you just have to be willing to be the first person to take that step and take all of the heavy hitting that comes with it. Because that's the only way that we're going to see progress happen as a whole.
For sure. So have you ever considered, as a competitor, have you ever considered entering the MMA space, getting into MMA and venturing outside of the jiu-jitsu world?
That's so funny, because everybody asks me this, and I have never like, yeah, I thought about it insofar as to be like, okay, me as an MMA fighter, what does that look like? No. No. I just never wanted to be punched in the face. And I know people are saying like, well, you don't have to do that. You can like learn the bare bones of striking and then get your wrestling up to par and then take things to the ground really quick. Honestly, I've never really been interested in it. When I think about MMA, I think about like head trauma. I'm already really crazy, so I don't think I want to like have of whatever's happening in my brain right now. but also the degree of injury, the degree of training. It's not something that I've always ever really been interested in. Like when it comes to learning the technical side of it, it's really cool and interesting. If I take an MMA class, like I'd be happy to know how to apply jujitsu in a way that would help with actual combat, because no one's gonna fucking go to 50-50 in a street fight. That's interesting. But as far as actually putting myself in that realm to like strike and go through sparring, it's never really appealed to me. Like I don't really have a reason. It's kind of like a lot of you guys that know me as an artist probably don't really like art. Like maybe you're not interested in drawing or painting. I'm just not interested in MMA like that. I like watching it. I support people that do it. I love people that are making careers out of it, that are in jiu-jitsu. I'm looking at Mackenzie Dern. I'm looking at Dorino. I'm looking at, unfortunately, Rodolfo Beer. But I'm looking at all these people that made those careers happen, and I support them. But it's never really been my thing.
Yeah, that loss last week was a hard one to watch. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of losses, is there any loss in your career you'd eventually like to get back? And what do you think about maybe trying to challenge that loss at like a fight to win or somewhere where it's not an IBJJF and you have to hope that you'll get in that bracket with that person again?
Actually, no, because it sounds so douchey. I don't. I haven't lost a lot as a black belt. I think I've only lost. I lost against Mackenzie Dern at Europeans, or yeah, I lost against Mackenzie Dern at Europeans by referee decision. Avenged that loss 2 or 3 times. I won against her, and then I lost against Monique Elias when I was a brown belt. And then I avenged that in the Absolute World Finals my first year at black belt. So I got both those losses back within the year. It's so funny, within the year. And that's simply because I kind of became more confident. Like I used to give people a lot of credit that were black belts when I was a black belt. I was like, oh, they're more black belt than I am. They're way more black belt than I could ever be. Which is such a weird thing to think, because you are literally the same people. You're doing the same training. No one has like more access to secret training than you do. But I always had this thought that these people just knew more and were better. And then after I competed with them for the first time and lost, I was like, no, I can totally do this. That was a fluke. Like I just messed up because I was in my head. And when I came out of my head, then it just became so much easier to go against them. So I don't really have a loss that I want to avenge. I think I would prefer to think about like missed opportunities, like the year that I had shoulder surgery where I wish that I had competed. I think I really would have liked Natalie De Jesus and Claudia Duval, and probably even Tayani. I know people were talking about a matchup between me and Tayani for forever, and that never came to fruition. So those three were always matches that I always wanted to see.
Awesome. So you talked earlier about Emily being a big influence in your jujitsu journey. Is there anybody else in your jujitsu journey who you feel has been a really big influence like that, and who's really shaped you, whether it was mentally, on the mats, emotionally? Is there anybody out there that has really, been an angel on your shoulder?
Oh my gosh, so many people, and a lot of them. Emily has been probably the most consistent angel on the shoulder. She's always kind of been there in the periphery or in the foreground. If I ever needed her, I could come talk to her. And we did have a brief like interlude where we weren't really talking that much, but that's since she was focusing on having children and running her gym, and like I was focusing on my other things. But she's always been somebody that I've run to for advice, and has always steered me in the right direction. When I was starting out, for sure, JT Torres, Jay Hayes, everybody kind of involved in being step-in coaches for me at the time, like William Van Horniff. Who else am I thinking about? just people that were always available to me as coaches and as advice givers, and just as people who were continuously encouraging me and pushing me to strive further in my jiu-jitsu career. As for recently, some really wonderful influences have been my dear friend Hillary Van Ornum, who owns a gym in Portland, Oregon called Unicorn Jiu-Jitsu, who has been just an incredible supporter and is always like trading instruction, advice with me, and always kind of helping me to understand that I am exactly who I am. Like, I don't need to pretend to be anyone else. Everything that I have as a jiu-jitsu athlete is worthwhile enough. Then I have, when I went to visit England, my friend Nina, I already forgot her name, but you know her, Nina JJ Power on Instagram. She's a black belt under Haja Gracie. She's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. She really inspired me to get some of my confidence back as a competitive athlete, because before I had gone to London, I was kind of like, whatever, like, competition isn't for me. It's not fun. I don't like it. I don't like hard training. And she is somebody that is very competitive and is always committing herself to hard training, even if she's not competing. And having her push the pace on me and then give me advice and then talk to me about competition and reframing it through a different lens really helped me to build a stronger and better relationship with my jiu-jitsu right now. So she is somebody that I definitely like to shout out. And also good friend Maggie Left, who did a lot of the same kind of work for me in Madrid. So lots of people, definitely forgetting a ton. Definite shout out to my boyfriend Samson Saucer, who's a brown belt. He trains in Gustavo Machado, Norfolk. That's him and his dad and his sister's gym in Virginia. He is a really big source of inspiration for me in terms of helping to understand that the way that I'm thinking about jiu-jitsu isn't critical, and it isn't defining me as a person. That I can be my own individual outside of who I am in the martial arts space, which is totally helpful.
Amazing. Last question for you, because this is officially the Half Guard Half Hour, double half hour podcast today. I love it. I love it. Officially the longest show I've done so far. Looking past COVID, looking as we are hopefully coming to an end of this somewhere in the next 6 to 8 months, what are your hopes going into the latter half of 2021 and early 2022? What are your goals, or what are some aspirations you have to end this year and start 2022?
Definitely sharpen my skills as an instructor, improve and take on weird guards that I'm not used to as a practitioner. I've been playing around with the Berimbolo, Crab Ride. My training partner at the moment, somebody who is Marcelo Garcia purple belt, but is now just kind of doing his own thing, John. Him and I have been workshopping a lot of what the Norwegians and the guys in Europe have been playing around with when it comes to like matrix guards. So just defining myself more as a practitioner that is beyond just Spider and De La Riva, which is what people are used to seeing me do. And then plan for my own academy, 1000%. That's always been a high stakes dream of mine. And right now I'm just plotting on figuring out where that's going to be, what it's going to look like, who I'd like to come on board to help me run this. And just staying tuned in terms of like planning what the actuality of that dream will look like for the next year.
Amazing. As soon as that opens up, no matter where it is in the country, I will be there on day one to come check it out. First of all, thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this with me tonight. I really appreciate you, Dominyka. Thank you. Any closing words for anybody out there that's gonna or be watching this live right now, or anybody who'll listen to this later on Spotify and audio? Any closing words from you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
Let me access my guru side and say that you are exactly where you're supposed to be at this current time and place. Honestly, this is really sound advice. It's the best advice that I've ever been given by my friends and people that I indulge as my mentors. It's always like, don't overthink where you are. If you're working, if you understand what your dreams are, if you understand what your goals are, whether they're in jiu-jitsu or in life, and you have made plans to help pursue them, and it's slow going as it always is, don't worry about how long it's going to take to get there, because you will get there. The important thing is that you're showing up. All it takes is like showing up to class to progress. All it takes is showing up for your dream, whatever it may be, in order for it to actually happen. So don't worry, you'll be fine. You're exactly where you need to be.
Amazing closing words. Dominyka, thank you for joining me on the podcast. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll enjoy listening to this later on audio. Dominyka, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. This is such a fun podcast. I can't wait to revisit it again on Spotify and other sources.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good night, guys.
Bye.